People need to remember that setting up TVW, establishing TVW, and realizing the TVW dream was a lot harder than anybody imagined. We all take it for granted today, but it was hugely controversial when we proposed it.
I remember people even saying that they liked keeping their work in the dark and felt like opening the door to cameras would really change the way that people spoke about legislation and their willingness to grandstand for the cameras.
It was obvious to me that the more that the public knew what was going on, the better off the outcome would be.
The House was all in, very supportive. The Senate was, I would say, reluctant at best.
What drove me was I thought there was tremendous power in having the people see our legislators struggling.
And that's what TVW does. It provides full transparency for what is happening in our state government. And I think that mission is never more important than it is right now.
3, 2, 1, 0.
TVW's origin story really dates back to October of 1992. At that time, I was serving as Chief of Staff to Governor Booth Gardner, and our Director of Policy was Stan Marshburn. And he bounced into my office with that bow tie on that he often wore, and he said, "I know what you ought to do when we get out of here. You ought to start a state version of C-SPAN."
I wandered into Denny's office and he said, "So what are you thinking about doing when this gig's over?" I said, "You know what we ought to do? We ought to do this thing, get television, get this government process on television."
And I slept on it a couple of days, and I went over to his office. I said, "Stan, I actually think that's a great idea. Let's you and I do that together." Stan's idea that he brought in October of 1992 was actually one that when he had been employed at the Evergreen State College, he had proposed in hopes that Evergreen might be the one that would operate the network. But in fact, it wasn't timely at that point.
I know that what we did with TVW was made possible by efforts that came before us, in which the state of Washington made it very clear that they were in favor of good government and clean government, and the people of the state of Washington cared about government. In 1972, there was a people's initiative that created the open meetings laws and the public records laws and really opened up government and made a public commitment to transparency and access.
I think one of the reasons why TVW has been so successful is because there is a culture of transparency and a belief in the importance of having access to government functions that permeates our entire culture, whether it's the public disclosure laws or the campaign financing laws. Our state citizens believe that they have a right to access their government and to know what is happening, and our officials believe that.
Taking government onto TV and making it available through television just is exponential transparency. It just opened up the promise of what was created in 1972.
It became especially timely because that was at the beginning of the decline of newspapers' commitment to coverage of the state capitol and the state legislative session, which has declined from the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. As the industry has changed, they devote fewer resources to it. And as a consequence, we went out and surveyed and documented that there had been a decline. We also documented the fact that there had been a rise in state public affairs network around the country, and we really caught a wave. It was just incredibly fortuitous timing for us to propose this. As difficult as it was, taking a couple of years as it did, it was good timing, fortunate timing.
At the time, the written press was a big deal. There were lots of reporters. Press conferences had 20, 25 reporters in the room when people would hold a press conference and debate the budget or do one thing or another. There was a lot of coverage and a lot of stuff in the press, but you could count the column inches, and over time that hole was getting smaller and smaller.
setting up TVW, establishing TVW, and realizing the TVW dream was a lot harder than anybody imagined. We all take it for granted today, but it was hugely controversial when we proposed it. One of my favorite stories was about lobbying members of the legislature. And I went to one office and I said, here's our idea. It's like C-SPAN, you know, gavel to gavel coverage. Meeting starts, camera comes on, meeting's over, camera goes off. And the reaction was, oh, C-SPAN, I absolutely love C-SPAN. So I said, then can I assume that you'll be supportive? No, can't do that. And I said, wait a minute, you just said you love C-SPAN. We're like C-SPAN for the state. He said, you know what, if we brought cameras in here, everybody would just talk forever. They'd want the attention. It would be all about the publicity. We can't do that. I said, okay, well, let's keep an open mind. I went to the next office, same thing, like C-SPAN, and the person said, I love C-SPAN. Oh, I just love C-SPAN. Again, so I could assume I have your support. The response, no, I can't do that. I said, well, why is that? You know, if you brought cameras in here, it would absolutely chill debate. Everybody would be paralyzed. They'd be afraid to say anything. And that really captured the kind of paradox of those who opposed it for opposite reasons when we proposed it.
It was very contentious at the time. The House took that vote, but the Senate was going to have no part of it. I remember people even saying that they liked keeping their work in the dark and felt like opening the door to cameras would really change the way that people spoke about legislation and their willingness to grandstand for the cameras.
Whereas the citizens of Washington have an inherent right to watch their government at work.
And the House was all in, very supportive. The Senate was, I would say, reluctant at best. And it wasn't just Democrats. Both sides had problems with the concept. I don't think they liked the intrusion. It was just about the time when the press was starting to thin out here. And they'd had some bad experiences with newspaper people taking pictures late night of somebody falling asleep when they'd worked a 20-hour day. And so there were a lot of those, you know, this is not a private club, it's a public place, but we don't necessarily want us caught off guard all the time.
But we had some leverage because there were some who actually did want coverage and they wanted to make sure that it came in. They thought the public had a right, as a matter of principle, to be able to see their deliberations. And we had some allies on the principle of independence. And most notably, Republican Speaker Clyde Ballard from Wenatchee was a staunch ally and in fact took some heat over it with his Senate counterparts because he kind of pushed ahead and got out ahead of the process a little bit.
For the members' information, this concurrent resolution has to do with the cameras and the broadcasting of our chamber activities and also of the committees. And this resolution is what will authorize the cameras to be used for the remainder of today and broadcasting the entire chamber proceedings at a later date. The question before the House is the adoption of Senate Concurrent Resolution 8425. Are there any remarks? Gentleman from District 12, Representative Foreman.
Lights, camera, action.
Okay, any further remarks? Question before the House is the adoption of Senate Concurrent Resolution 8425. As many are in favor, say aye. As many are opposed, no. Motion carried, resolution adopted. It was obvious to me that the more that the public knew what was going on, the better off the outcome would be. Because the public is the one that, they were the ones that were being affected, and they were being cut out. Well, let me flip back a little bit to my background. We were migrant fruit workers, and so for the first 14 years of my life, we were constantly moving in several different schools all the time, and so from Arkansas, we were kind of the down and outers, and through that, I got to the place where I didn't like people being mistreated. My concern, like I say, I use the word respect because that's a word that's really important to me. And you respect everybody, from the down and outer to the guy that's worth $1 gazillion. So TVW, as far as I'm concerned, in fact, I believe it could be utilized even more, showing the public more what goes on, because it's their money, it's their rights.
It also was passed with strong bipartisan support, yet the governor vetoed that much-needed property tax reduction.
The numbers that are bandied around about revenues in excess of expenses are large numbers, and certainly to the average person, they're huge.
We really found out once the cameras were on that did happen a little bit, but before we knew it, people forgot that the cameras were there and just carried on business kind of as they had previously.
Staff was very strongly advocating in the Senate to do this. Both communications offices, the Senate Democrats and the Senate Republicans, were proponents of the coverage because they thought it would get out to more constituents one way or another. A lot of the communications people thought that it was very important to show all of the members doing the work that legislators do, as opposed to just leadership or key chairs or whatever, which TVW had the potential to do.
I was working in the legislature on the comms staff in the House in the early 90s when the whole idea of TVW came up, and Denny was over there advocating for the creation of it and things. Any opportunity the public has to learn more about what the legislature's doing and participate in the process is a good and healthy thing. And I thought I'd watch C-SPAN and the access that provided to citizens to the federal system, so the chance to provide that similar access to the state system, absolutely.
All rise.
And I also think that the fact that the court was willing to open up its sessions eventually really helped ease the nervousness of the members of the Senate.
When I was a legislator, I think the thing that mattered to me the most was that concept of unfiltered message delivery to the voters of our state and the people who are really going to be making decisions about the future leadership of our state. The fact that TVW shares every part of a hearing, every part of a floor session, from the time that gavel hits the dais to start a meeting to the time that gavel bangs to close a meeting, people have an opportunity to hear everything that goes on. To listen, to make up their minds about issues, just like legislators sit and listen and make up their minds about legislation, and I think that's important.
When people watch a hearing, they can see their government in action. They know what people are thinking, they know what the decisions are made, they see those decisions being made, and they have the opportunity to engage with that decision-making process through a number of ways, which TVW fosters.
What drove me was I thought there was tremendous power in having the people see our legislators struggling with our public policy issues, because they do, and they do struggle with the process. But seeing that has got to make them more human, but seeing that it's an honest struggle to get to a solution that makes our society better, makes our daily lives better, that's got to make everybody feel better about what they're doing and to care about it and to invest in it and to feel good about that.
To me, the most important mission of TVW is to facilitate citizen engagement in policy making at the state level, in what is happening in their state government, and to help foster a sense of trust, because there is full transparency. And that's what TVW does. It provides full transparency for what is happening in our state government. And I think that mission is never more important than it is right now.
We've all felt the impacts this year of Washington's worsening wildfire seasons. I really believe that the more people are informed, the better kind of outcome you're going to have. And it stops questions. Right now there's so much question about what is really going on, who is really telling the truth. And if you've got a camera on you while you're debating and negotiating, and you have to make your points in public, then it's pretty revealing. And so it should be.